Okay, so a very good morning to all of you. Can one of you please confirm whether you are able to see the slides?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay. Okay, so we are discussing about the MAC layer. So today we'll conclude that. Till now in the MAC layer, we have looked into the basic switching technique by applying the spanning tree protocol, how a packet is being forwarded or rather how a frame is being forwarded from one node to another node via a dedicated link. And then we have looked into the error detection and the error correction techniques. So today we are going to look into two other aspects of the MAC layer. The first one is the framing and the second one is the channel access. So let us first start with framing. Now the idea of the framing or the requirement of the framing is something like that. Say we are now interfacing with the physical layer. Now in physical layer, you are essentially receiving uh, mm, so yeah. So in the physical layer, you are essentially receiving the um, the signal, the analog signal, right? Now the analog signal that you are receiving there, we apply techniques such as sampling, then quantization, etc., to actually convert this particular analog signal to digital signal. Well, now this idea of the sampling and quantization, all these things, I'm not sure whether you have been taught in your signal and network course or otherwise that is the part of the physical layer. We are not going to cover it in details in the current course. So with the sampling, quantization, and also with the help of techniques like modulation and demodulation, so these are the kind of techniques which are typically applied at the physical layer. And by applying such kind of techniques, we basically get a digital bit stream. So that means at a physical layer, whatever you are doing, that you are continuously sensing the signal, get the signal ready, apply such kind of sampling quantization, and if the signal is modulated, then apply demodulation to finally get the digital signal, and then from the digital signal, infer the bit sequence. Okay. Now, from the digital signal to bit sequence, again we have different techniques of encoding that how bit stream of zeros and ones are actually encoded within a digital signal. There are different kind of encoding techniques. For example, the typical Ethernet network that we use, it uses a encoding technique called the Manchester encoding or differential Manchester encoding. So those kind of techniques are there. So those techniques, by applying those kind of techniques, you finally receive a bit stream. Okay. Now in the physical layer, you are continuously doing this process, and you are continuously receiving some kind of bit streams. Now remember that this is a kind of continuous process. That means even if you are not getting any signal, well, then also you are generating some kind of bit sequence. Possibly you are generating continuous streams of zeros. Okay, so you are not receiving any signal, means your signal strength is zero. In that case, you are receiving continuous streams of zeros. Now, this continuous streams of zeros does not mean that you are not receiving any signal. It might also happen that this continuous zeros actually indicate that your data contains a continuous bit streams of zeros. Right? So that way, whatever you are receiving from the physical layer, this part you are forwarding to the data link. Now, as I have mentioned, that first of all, you are receiving these continuous streams of zeros and ones. Whenever you are receiving, say, multiple frames, actually you are receiving frame by frame. So you have received one data frame followed by another data frame and so on. So whenever you are receiving this frame by frame, again, the first task is to identify these frame boundaries. That means when a particular frame say F1 ends and the next frame say F2 starts. Okay. So you do not know whether this is the frame boundary in this bit stream or this is the frame boundary in bit stream. So you need a kind of dedicated mechanism to find out the frame boundaries. That is one thing. The second thing is that you also need to understand that even if you are receiving say continuous streams of zeros, or even sometimes you can receive ones because of the noise, possibly the data is not coming from a valid sender, rather it is coming from some kind of noise generated in the environment. Even in that case, you are receiving a bit streams of zeros and ones. You need to understand whether those bits that are being written by the physical layer, whether they are part of any valid frame or not. Okay. So that way it is important for the map layer to understand these frame boundaries. Well, so you need to find out that which part of the bit stream is a single frame. Well, so that is the kind of problem that we have to solve in map layer. Right? Now the obvious solution that might come to in your mind that, well, let us use a length field in the field header, okay, and use that length field to find out that how many bits are part of the frame. So what do you think? Means just tell me the answer. It's based on your thought process. That do you think that can I use a length field in the header and solve this particular problem? Yes or no? Anything from your side? Any one of you, if you are following that example? Well, we cannot do it. Well, using a length field. Why? Because see, even before getting the length field, I need to understand that which part is the frame header. Well, now to understand that which part is the frame header, I need something else. So I cannot simply say that in this particular bit stream, this 1010 actually constitutes the frame header. Well, so you cannot blindly say that. So you need to understand that, well, where even a kind of header starts. Now to solve this particular problem, what we do that we append some flag bits at the beginning of the frame to indicate that this is the kind of starting of the frame. So these particular flag bits are called as the start frame delimiter and end frame delimiter. So typically in Ethernet or Wi-Fi, this kind of network, we do not use a end frame delimiter. We basically use a start frame delimiter and the length field that I mentioned earlier. So the start frame delimiter is a special bit sequence indicating the beginning of a frame. Okay. So say for example, this Ethernet, in case of Ethernet, the start frame delimiter is 10101011. That means in a bit sequence, if you see that, well, there is this bit sequence of 10101011, then you will be sure that, well, this is the kind of bit frame is from this particular position, a frame is being started. Okay. Then in the Ethernet header, we have a length field. So once you have understood that from here the header starts, then you can decode the length field and use the length field to find out that how long the frame is. Well, so that way nowadays we do not use the end frame delimiter. It is now deprecated. Now, even before the start frame delimiter, we use another set of bits which is called the preamble. So these preamble bits are used to synchronize the sender and the receiver. Because remember that this internet that works in a kind of distributed fashion. So every machine is working independently. Now, whenever you are sampling the signal means that you are receiving some kind of say analog signal. From this analog signal, you need to first sample it at independent time instances. Okay. So sampling the signal, because see this analog signal that you are getting, it is a kind of continuous signal. Well, but finally the bit stream that you are getting, that bit stream is a kind of discrete signal. Now, to convert from analog to discrete, okay, or continuous to discrete, we use this method of sampling. So that basically means that fixed time interval, you read the value of the signal, okay, and then we apply something called quantization. Quantization means, say, if the signal strength is more than some predefined threshold 3, then you consider it as a 1, otherwise you consider it as a 0. Okay, so that for example, at a particular time instances, when you see that the signal is less than this threshold at a sampling point, then you call it as a 0. Otherwise, you call it as a 1. So this is the kind of sampling and the quantization method that we use. Right? Now, for doing this sampling, one of the primary requirements is that you need to find out this time interval tau. And this time interval tau need to be same for the sender as well as the receiver. Otherwise, it might happen that the sender has generated the signal at a particular sampling rate and the receiver will sample it in a different way. Well, so that is why we need a clock synchronization between the sender and the receiver. Now, to do this clock synchronization, again we put up preamble bits, which are again the known bit sequence, and that is in case of Ethernet, it is 10101010. Okay. So this basically says that you actually know that when you are going to get a bit sequence of 10101010. So by knowing that now we are going to get an 1, you can actually adjust your clock so that you can sample at a particular point where you are actually receiving an 1. Now, this set of bit sequence, that means 10101010, followed by the start frame delimiter, that means 10101011. This actually constitutes my beginning of an Ethernet frame. So whenever you will get this particular fixed bit sequence from your sequence of bits, you will understand that you are at the beginning of an Ethernet frame. Well, now can you think of carefully for 2 minutes and let me know whether this particular problem or whether this particular approach solves the problem. Okay. So before even going to that, let me just briefly tell about this Ethernet frame structure. So in the Ethernet frame structure, as you can see, you have a preamble. So preamble is basically 6 bytes long. That means this 10101010 that we repeat for 6 times. Then I have the start frame delimiter. After the start frame delimiter, I have the destination address and the source address. Earlier we have discussed that why we put the destination address at the beginning, and then we have a type or length field. So this length field actually determines that what is going to be the length of the Ethernet frame. Right? So from here you actually know that, well, this is going to be the length of the frame, and you can understand that what is the end of the frame. Okay. Now coming back to our original question, that if we use some kind of fixed bit sequence at the preamble and at the start frame delimiter, does it solve my problem completely, or does it introduce some new problem in terms of extracting the data from the frames? What do you think? Just take 2 minutes and think and let me know.
Sir, what if the delimiter appears in the data part?
Exactly. Very good. So this start frame delimiter, we are taking it as a kind of fixed bit sequence. Now, this delimiter can also appear in the data part, right? Now, if this delimiter appears from the data part, and the algorithm that we have just discussed right now, that whenever you are getting a start frame delimiter, you assume it to be a beginning of a frame. That particular approach will create problem here, because in the data you can also have the start frame delimiter. Okay. Now to solve this particular problem, we have 2 different approaches. One we call as the byte stuffing. Byte stuffing is particularly used in a network, in a type of network that are called the PPPoE. PPPoE is basically the point-to-point protocol. So there we use the idea of this byte stuffing. So the idea is something like this, that if you have start frame delimiter in your part of the data, that will say you have the data A followed by start frame delimiter followed by B, then you have a special escape byte. Okay? So this special escape byte, what it does, that you have a start frame delimiter as a part of the data. Then before the start frame delimiter, you put up a escape byte. That actually means that if your start frame delimiter is preceded by an escape byte, that means this start frame delimiter is not actually an indicator of a beginning of a frame. Rather, it is basically the part of the data. Okay, so this escape character or the escape byte is used in, as I have mentioned, in point-to-point protocol. So that is one of the popular data link layer protocol. Now, in the same logic that escape, we use a special byte escape as a part of the start frame delimiter to escape the start frame delimiter. This escape character or the escape byte can also be a part of the data, right? So if that is the case, we insert another escape before that escape. So that means if you have A escape B, then you convert it to A escape B. So that way, at the sender side, you are encoding the data in such a way so that if you have a start frame delimiter, you put a escape byte before that. And if you have an escape byte at a part of the data, you put another escape before that. And at the receiver side, whenever you are decoding the frame, whenever you see that escape byte, and after that start frame delimiter, you do not consider it as a beginning of the frame. Rather, you consider it as a part of the data. Now, whenever you are extracting the exact data bits, whatever you are doing, that if you have an escape, you remove that escape. If you have two escape, one after another, say you remove the first escape and get back the original data. Okay. So this is one approach, what we call it a byte stuffing. The second approach, which is used in protocol like high-level data link controller HDLC. So this HDLC is another popular MAC protocol. It uses another idea called the bit stuffing. So this bit stuffing, what it does, it basically try to reduce the overhead of byte stuffing, because in case of byte stuffing, you are putting up one additional byte for the start frame delimiter or the escape character. Now in HDLC, what we do that in case of HDLC, each frame begins and ends with this particular bit sequence 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 0. So that is the kind of start frame delimiter in case of HDLC, and this particular thing we call it as the flag byte. Okay, so in terms of HDLC, the start frame delimiter is named as the flag byte. Now, in case of this flag byte, we have 6 consecutive ones. Okay. Now, that way, in the data, if you have 6 consecutive ones, then you start for insert a 0 bit if there are 5 consecutive ones in the data. Okay. So that means if you are going to transmit 0. If you are going to transmit 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, then so if you want to transmit 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 0, okay, then after the 5th one, you put up an additional 0. Okay, so that way you will ensure that there can never be 6 consecutive ones in your data part. Okay. So that is the idea of bit stuffing, which is used in HDLC. So here is an example that you are going to transfer this bit sequence. So whenever you are going to transfer this bit sequence, after 5 consecutive ones, you insert a 0. Okay. Again, after 5 consecutive ones, you insert a 0. After 5 consecutive ones, you insert a 0. Now, whenever you are going to receive that bit, after 5 consecutive ones, if you have a 0, you remove that 0. Okay. Now you can say that, well, after 5 consecutive ones, I can have 0 in my data part. That means my data itself might be 0, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0, 0. Okay. Then you again do the bit stuffing and make it as 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Put an additional stuffed 0 followed by the original zeros. Now at the receiver side, you remove this stuffed zeros and you get the corresponding original data stream. So these are the kind of two approaches which are used, bit stuffing and byte stuffing, allowing the start frame delimiter or a special flag which works like a start frame delimiter to identify the beginning of a frame. And this is the procedure through which we actually extract the frames from the continuous bit stream. Okay. So any doubt up to this point? Okay, good. So I assume that the concept of framing is clear to us. Now coming to the final problem that we are going to discuss in the context of data link layer that we call as the channel allocation problem. So what is this channel allocation problem? So many of the times we see that the media that we are going to use, that is a broadcast media. Okay. So typically earlier we have learned about the learning switch. So typically in a learning switch, it is not a broadcast media because the learning switch finds out that in which particular port a machine is connected with and it forwards the data in that particular port. But again, remember that even after the switch, I can use a physical layer hub to connect multiple devices together. Okay. Say here is the left-hand side example where multiple devices are connected via hub. And what a hub does, that whatever signal it is receiving in its input port, it is just going to replicate the same signal in all its output. Okay. So that means whatever data is being received, that particular data is actually transmitted in all towers. Now here you can just think of that, say this workstation is going to transfer some data. Now whenever this workstation is going to transfer some data, it is received by this hub, and this hub is actually replicating this data in all the outgoing link. Similarly, whenever it is received in this hub, it is going to replicate it in all the outgoing link. That way, all other workstations are going to get that data. So that way, whenever this particular workstation is transmitting some data, if another workstation starts transmitting the data at the same instance of time, then there will be a collision in the channel. Yes, so that way, whenever you are connecting multiple machines over the wire network, there is a possibility of collision. Okay? Collision basically means that the signals they get overlapped and produce a noise. Well, and these kind of problems are much more severe in case of wireless network. So in wireless network, what happens that multiple devices are going to transmit simultaneously. Say this laptop is going to transmit when the mobile phone is also going to transmit. Now in this particular case, if the laptop and the mobile phone transmits data simultaneously, then there would be a collision in the channel because it is a kind of open channel. If it is something like that, you can think of that in a room, multiple people are trying to talk simultaneously. So it will create a noise and no one will be able to actually find out that what is being talked about. The same thing also happens in cellular network. So in cellular network, in a single cell, you have multiple different mobile phones. Now, if two mobile phones tries to transmit simultaneously on the same channel, there will be this kind of collision. Okay. So these are the kind of typical problem that happens when multiple devices are going to share the same transmission channel. So in that case, if more than one devices are going to transmit simultaneously, that will create a noise in the channel and that will result in data loss or data drop from the channel. Now this particular problem, to solve this particular problem, what we have to do, we have to allocate separate channels to separate devices. Well, and this particular problem is known to be the channel allocation problem. So we'll see that what are the different approaches that we use for the channel allocation. Now the historical channel allocation techniques that are actually even nowadays used in cellular network, they use two different approaches. One is called the frequency division multiple access, and the second one is called the time division multiple access. Now, in case of frequency division multiple access, what we do that the entire bandwidth that I have, I divide that bandwidth into multiple smaller bandwidth. Okay, so a bandwidth means basically a range of frequencies, signal frequencies, right? So here actually the knowledge from your signal and network course is required a bit. So a frequency, so whenever I say that I'm going to transfer at 2.4 gigahertz frequency band, that means I have a range of frequency where the mean frequency is 2.4 gigahertz, and in that particular band I am going to transfer the data. Now in case of Wi-Fi network, this 2.4 gigahertz frequency basically means from 2.1 to 2.6 in that particular range. Approximately, I forgot the exact thing. You can just find it out in by doing a Google. So you have a range of frequencies, and in that range of frequencies, you have the entire bandwidth. So you are going to transfer within that band. Now, what we do, that entire frequency band that I have, I divide it into multiple different subchannels. So in Wi-Fi, what is being done, that is individual subchannels are 20 megahertz wide. Okay. So I divide it into 20 megahertz subchannels and then allocate one particular band to one user. That means one user is using this band F1, another user is using this band F2, the third user is going to use the band F3 and so on. Okay. So that this particular approach in the MAC here, it is called a frequency division multiple access. Now remember one thing, maybe you have heard about the terminology frequency division multiplexing and the time division multiplexing. So this frequency division multiplexing and the time division multiplexing, they are different from frequency division multiple access and the time division multiple access. That means FDM, okay, that is not same as FDM. Similarly for the TDM. So typically this frequency division multiplexing, conceptually it is again the same. The entire band you divide it into multiple frequency and then tune the transmission channel to use one of that band. Now this frequency division multiplexing is actually used in the physical layer, whereas so this frequency division multiplexing is used at the physical layer, whereas FDMA is used in the MAC layer. Now the basic difference between these two is that in case of frequency division multiplexing, we tune the transmitter to a particular frequency band. Okay. So that means a particular device that is that have been allocated the band, say 2.46. This particular band is being allocated. Then the transmitter is tuned to this band. Okay. So and the transmitter only receives data from this particular band only. But in case of frequency division multiple access, or in case of FDMA, that is applied at the MAC layer. So in the MAC layer, what happens? That the entire band on which a transmitter is being tuned, you receive that entire band and then logically pick up the data from the channel for which you are assigned to. Well, so for example, if F11 is assigned to one particular user, then typically this user actually receives the data in this entire band, but it accepts in the MAC layer, it accepts the data only from F11. Okay. Whereas in case of FDM, it only receives the data in F11 because it is implemented in the physical layer. So this is the kind of points that I wanted to mention, that do not get confused with FDM with FDMA. These are the two different approaches that are applied in the different layers. FDM is applied at the physical layer, whereas FDMA is applied at the MAC layer. And in case of FDM, the transmitter is tuned to a particular frequency band, and you receive data only at that frequency band. Whereas in FDMA, you apply it in the MAC layer. That means the transmitter is receiving data in the entire bandwidth. That means the total share bandwidth that I have, and the MAC layer is extracting only part of it for which it has been allocated. Similarly, in case of time division multiple access, we divide the time and allocate each time unit to different users. Okay. So these are the kind of different approaches for the static channel allocation. Now in case of static channel allocation, one thing you can immediately understand that there is a possibility of loss of data. Sorry, not loss of data, there is a possibility of underutilization of the bandwidth. So for example, I have divided the entire band into 12 different subchannels. And currently I have only 2 users who are using the using my communication medium. So in that case, maybe say 2 different subchannels, say F2 and F10 are currently being used, and the remaining part are getting wasted. Okay. So that kind of issues are there with static channel allocation, and that is the reason we go with the dynamic channel allocation. Now, this dynamic channel allocation, what it does that it dynamically allocate the channels to the end users whenever required. Right? And this dynamic channel allocation idea in MACLAIR, that is done by the set of protocols which we call as the multiple access protocol. We call it multiple access protocols because now multiple users or multiple devices are going to access the network simultaneously. And you need to dynamically allocate the channels to those users. So that's why we call it as the multiple access protocol. Okay. Now, what happens typically in the dynamic channel allocation? The dynamic channel allocation is basically it does a kind of probabilistic scheduling among the devices or users. So these are the kind of contention-based systems. So what is meant by contention-based system? We'll see that broadly it is something like that multiple users are contending for the channel, and based on certain probabilities, some users will get access to the channel. Okay. And our target will be to schedule the nodes such that the contention can be minimized. So let us see the contention-based protocol that we have. So the oldest protocol in this domain was the pure Aloha. Right? So the idea of the pure Aloha was that you transmit the frame whenever you have one. That actually results in a collision. That might result in a collision. So, for example, in the earlier cases, we used to transfer the data whenever I have certain data to transmit. Now, that I am actually transmitting probabilistically with the belief that other nodes are not engaging in transmitting data at the same instance of time. If they transmit data at that same instance of time, that results in a collision. Right. So typically what happens that in such a case, these hubs, they work as a acknowledger. That means, say in this diagram, you are broadcasting a frame. Okay. Now, whenever the frame is going to the hub is rebroadcasting. Well, now, whenever the hub is rebroadcasting it, you will get back the frame again. Well, so whenever you are getting back the frame again from the hub, that works like an acknowledgement. If you do not get back the frame from the hub, you believe that there is possibly a collision and the packet has lost. Well, so if you do not get back the frame within a timeout interval, then you retransmit the frame. So this is the idea of the pure Aloha-based system, that whenever you have certain frame to transmit, you transmit it immediately, then wait for the acknowledgement. Acknowledgement means wait for the same frame to hear back. If you do not hear back the frame within a timeout, you believe that when the frame has lost because of collision or because of contention, you retransmit the frame. Okay. Now, as you can understand that the efficiency of pure Aloha should be very low. Okay, because when every users have some data to send and everyone is trying to transmit, then at every time instance there will be a collision. Okay, so that way the efficiency of pure Aloha was very less. So that way the next set of protocols which came, that is called as the slotted Aloha. So the idea of the slotted Aloha is something like this, that you divide the time into discrete interval called the slots, and you transmit the frame at the beginning of the next one. Okay. So one of the requirements of the slotted Aloha is that the users need to agree on the slot boundary, and that way they need to have some kind of synchronization. So what you do that whenever you have certain frame to transmit, you wait till the beginning of the next slot and transmit it here. Well, so even with that kind of architecture, collision can still happen. So in case of a collision, you retransmit after a timeout interval. So although this idea of pure aloha and the slotted aloha looks something similar, that means in case of pure aloha, I am transmitting the frame whenever I have it. But in case of slotted aloha, I am not transmitting it immediately, rather waiting for the next slot to begin and then transmitting it at the beginning of the next slot. With this kind of slotted approach, you can actually double up the efficiency compared to pure aloha. Okay. But because these particular protocols are not used nowadays, I am not going to all this mathematical analysis of their efficiency, that how they double up the efficiency compared to pure aloha, but you can check the Tennenbaum book for that mathematical derivation. That how slotted aloha doubles up the efficiency compared to pure aloha. But even with the slotted aloha, the base channel utilization is 1 by d, okay, which is still very less. So approximately 36.7%. So that way, the next protocol that came to picture that we actually use nowadays, it is called the carrier sense multiple access or CSM. Okay. So what is this carrier sense multiple access? It uses an approach called physical carrier sensing or PCS. So the idea of this physical carrier sensing is that you sense the carrier to see whether there is any ongoing signal. So that was not there in case of slotted aloha or pure aloha. So in case of pure aloha, you transmit the frame immediately. In case of slotted aloha, you wait till the beginning of the next slot and then transmit it there. But here we introduce an idea of the carrier sensing. So what is that? That you wait and you check the carrier, or you try to sense the carrier to see whether there is any ongoing signal. Okay. And that you can do because whenever you are transmitting certain signal in the media, say for example, if it is an wired media, you will see some kind of voltage fluctuation. Well, if it is a kind of wireless media, you will see there is a kind of electromagnetic signal which is being received. So that way, you sense the physical carrier to know or to find out whether there is any ongoing signal. Now, if the physical carrier sensing returns the channel to be idle, then you send the data. Otherwise, you wait until the channel becomes idle. Okay. And if collision occurs, let's see, even for the physical carrier sensing, there can be collision. It might happen that there are two nodes, say N1 and N2. Okay. Both are trying to sense the data and they are actually sensing the channel. So they are connecting with a hub and they are trying to sense the channel. And whenever they are performing PCS, both will see the channel to be idle at the same instance of time. Okay, and they start transmitting the data. So again, with the physical carrier sensing, we increase the probability of transmitting the data, or reduce the probability of collision. But we cannot avoid collision completely. Collision can still happen when both the nodes sense the channel to be idle. Okay. Now, if collision occurs, then you wait for a random amount of time and repeat this process. That means you wait for a random amount of time, and then again you sense the channel. If you find out that channel to be idle, you transmit the data. So this particular protocol is called as the one persistent CSM. Now we have different variant of CSMA, and the popular one is the P-persistent CSMA. So the idea of the P-persistent CSMA is something like this, that you divide the time to logical slots. When a station is ready to send a frame, you sense the channel using physical carrier sensing or PCS. If the channel is idle at the current slot, then you transmit with probability P. And with probability 1 minus P, you target the next slot and repeat the process. Okay. So that is the kind of P-persistent CSMA. That means whenever you are finding out the channel to be idle, you do not immediately send the data. Rather, you send it with certain probability. Now, how this particular approach will reduce the amount of collision? Again, with the earlier example, if two nodes wants to transmit data simultaneously, so both senses the channel and both transmits with probability P. Now, whenever they are transmitting probabilistically, okay, transmitting with certain probability P means you generate a random number, if that random number is less than P, then you wait. If it is greater than P, then you transmit. Okay. So whenever you are transmitting with certain probability P, you are actually ensuring that, well, with probability P, these two stations is not going to transmit simultaneously. One will transmit in the current slot and the next one will transmit in the next slot. So that way, probabilistically, you are increasing or reducing the probability of collision. Okay. Now we have a variant of persistent CSMA that we call as the non-persistent CSMA. In case of non-persistent CSMA, if the channel is sensed busy through PCS, you wait for random amount of time and then sense it. Okay. Now, as you have seen, that collision can happen in case of CSMA, right? Whether you go for one persistent CSMA or two persistent CSMA or non-persistent CSMA. So two stations will sense the channel idle at the same time and starts transmission. So that might always happen. So that way a collision can happen in the channel. So you detect the collision. So detecting the collision means basically the power level of the signal is higher than the transmission power level. So collision basically means that you have one signal that you have transmitted in a specific power. Another stations have transmitted another signal with another power. So these two signals gets overlap. Now when these two signals get overlap, they generate a new signal, and the power of this new signal will be much higher compared to the original signals. Okay, so that way you will basically change the power of a signal, or rather power spectral density of a signal. And if the power threshold is more than some predefined threshold, we assume that there is a collision. Okay, so that way the collision signal will differ from the normal signal in terms of their power. Now, once you are detecting the collision, then you wait for some amount of time. That how much time you are going to wait. So this waiting procedure that we call as the backoff. Now, in case of random backoff, that we typically that historically people used to have, there you wait for a random amount of time if a collision is detected. But nowadays we use something called a binary exponential backoff. In case of binary exponential backoff, at the end attempt, you wait for the time equivalent of a random value from 0 to the power n minus 1 slots. So that means at the first attempt, what you do that you take a random value of 0 to 1 and you accordingly transmit. In the second attempt, you take a random value between 0 to 3 and transmit here. At the third attempt, you take a random value between 0 to 7 and transmit here. So what is the core idea of this binary exponential backoff is that means after every collision, we are increasing the backoff counter. Okay. Now, whenever you are selecting a random number in between 0 to 3, the probability that you will see a low number is much higher compared to whenever you are choosing a random number between 0 to 7. Okay. So that means whenever you are selecting or whenever you are going for the higher order exponential backoff, you increasing the probability of waiting, and that way you are reducing the chance of having collision. Okay. So in the earlier example, the two nodes are going to transmit simultaneously. Now, when there is a collision, both will in the first slot, both will select from 0 and 1. Okay. Now, when both are selecting from 0 and 1 with 50% probability, one will select 0, another will select 1. But both can select either 0s or either 1. Well, now in that case, there will be a collision. Now, if there is a collision, then you go with the second case, that means try to select from 0 to 3. Now, when 0 to 3, you are selecting a random number from 0 to 3, then you are decreasing or increasing the probability that these two stations will select different number. So that way you are reducing the probability of collision. Well, so this is the core idea of this binary exponential backup. Now, based on this kind of thing, the protocol that is being used nowadays, it is called the carrier sense multiple access with collision detection (CSMACD). Now, this CSMACD was used in the Ethernet frame before this learning switch. The concept of learning switch came into existence. Nowadays, also Ethernet channel access protocol uses P-persistent CSMA with CD collision detection. Now, there is a significance of having collision detection and its impact on the MAC frame rate. Okay. Now, what can happen that, well, you start transmitting a frame, but in the worst case, say this is the sender and this is my receiver. So the sender has started transmitting a frame. In the worst case, the receiver, the collision can happen near the receiver. Okay. Now, if the collision can happen in the near the receiver, assume that the propagation delay between the sender and the receiver is P, then the signal will take P amount of time to receive to reach to the receiver, and then a collision happens, and then you get the this collision signal. It will again take P time to reach to the sender. Okay. So that way, my worst case collision detection time is twice the propagation delay. Because in the worst case, the collision can happen near the receiver, and that signal needs to be propagated to the sender. Now, based on this principle, what we do that to detect the collision correctly, what I need to do, I need to ensure that by the time I have detected a collision, I have not completed the transmission of the current frame. Okay, because if I have completed the transmission of the current frame, and after that I receive a collision, I do not be able to, or I will not be able to sure that whether the collision has happened with my frame or whether I am receiving a collision signal because of a collision of other user. So there might be another user, say S2, for which there is a collision near the earth, and you get that collision signal back. Okay, so that case might also happen. Now, unless if you are transmitting the frame and by the time you have received the collision signal, if that happens, then you are sure that your frame has collided. Otherwise, this kind of confusion will happen. So that is why what we do that we keep a threshold on the minimum frame transmission time. Now, to detect a collision, the minimum frame transmission time should be equal to twice the propagation delay. And based on this, the minimum Ethernet frame size has been selected as 64 bytes. Okay. So depending on the typical Ethernet cable length and the rate of transmission and all these things, the minimum Ethernet frame size is considered to be the 64 bytes. Okay. Now let us look briefly about the performance aspects of the Ethernet. Now, in case of Ethernet, what we have seen that we have sequence of the frame transmission period and the contention period. So we'll have the frame transmission period where we are transmitting the frame, followed by a contention period where there will be the contention, again a successful frame transmission will be there. This contention, let us assume that the contention interval is the time when the channel bandwidth is not utilized due to collision. Now we need to estimate the probabilistic length of a contention interval. Let us see that how do we estimate it. Assume that K stations are ready to transmit, and each station transmits during a contention slot with probability. Now consider a given slot. The first thing that I have to compute that what is the probability that some station acquires the channel in that slot. Can you tell me what will be the probability of that? So there are K stations which are ready to transmit. Well, Now each stations transmit during a contention slot with probability P. Well, now what is the probability that some station acquires the channel in that slot? So what does it mean that some station acquires the channel in that slot? That particularly means that, well, out of the k station, one station will have chosen that slot, well, and remaining k minus 1 stations have not chosen the slot. Okay, so once one station has chosen the slot with probability P, and the remaining k minus 1 slots, k minus 1 stations, they have not chosen the slots, and not choosing the slot is probability 1 minus P. Okay, so that way my probability becomes Kp 1 minus P to the power k minus 1. Okay, so the k minus 1 stations are choosing with probability 1 minus P a particular slot, and one station is choosing probability P, and I have k station. Well, so that is the kind of probability that some station acquires the channel in that particular slot. Now in this particular equation, A is maximized when P equal to 1 by K. Okay, so you can just put the value of P, and you can see that just try to maximize this value of A, and you will see that A is maximized when P equal to 1 by K. And in that case, A tends to 1 by E. So that way, now the probability that the contention interval has exactly J slots is A into 1 minus A to the power J minus 1. Okay, so the contention interval has J slot means that in the first J minus 1 slots, well, the users are not been able to transfer, and in the J slots there was a successful transmission. So there was an unsuccessful transmission in the J minus 1 slot, followed by a successful transmission at the J slot. Well, now in that case, the probability will be A into, so A is the probability that you have a successful transmission, and 1 minus 1 is the probability that you have an unsuccessful transmission. So I have unsuccessful transmission in J minus 1 slot, so it is 1 minus A to the power J minus 1 into A, that is A into 1 minus A to the power J minus 1. Now what is the mean number of slots per contention? Now to find out the mean number of slots per contention, I will sum up this JA 1 minus A to the power J minus 1 from J equal to 0 to infinity. So if I compute the mean, it comes to be 1 by n. Okay. Now let tau be the propagation delay. A slot duration is set to 2 tau to ensure the collision detection within the slot duration that we have seen. That will take twice the propagation delay to ensure collision detection. And we have observed that the mean number of slots per contention is 1 by A. Well, so that way my mean contention interval will be 2 tau by A. Well, now with optimal P, A tends to 1 by E. Well, so the maximum value of W is 2 tau E, that is 5.4 tau. Okay. Now, that way we can compute the channel efficiency as P by P plus 2 tau by E. Okay. Now, with different number of stations and different frame size, if you try to plot, you will see that in case of Ethernet, the channel efficiency goes like this, and the channel efficiency becomes maximum when you take longer frames, like you take a frame size of 1024 byte or something like that. In that case, the channel efficiency goes close to 1. Okay. And based on this analysis, actually, in case of Ethernet, people decide about the maximum frame size and the maximum number of stations that can participate in a collision. And that way, the typical design of a switch or hubs are being done to ensure that you get the maximum efficiency even at the presence of pollution. Now, this is for the Ethernet in a wired network. Now, let us briefly discuss about the scenario in case of wireless network. In case of wireless network, the question comes that in case of wired network, we have used CSMA-CD, we have used carrier sense multiple access along with the collision detection. Now, the question that comes that can we detect collision over wireless? Then we can use the similar kind of protocol that are being used in case of Ethernet, right? The CSMA-CD. But typically in a wireless channel, this collision detection is much more challenging and rather impossible because wireless channel goes through multiple different factors like fading. Okay, so fading basically means that the signal strength drops as the signal propagates. Okay, so it is called attenuation is high. So as the signal gets propagated, the signal strength gradually gets dropped. Then there are the effect of shadowing. That means it gets affected by the shadow texture like the wall, the trees, even the human bodies. Okay, that actually reduce the power of the signal. Then there are multiple propagation that the reflected signal may come from different directions. So wherever you are transmitting within a room, you have a reflection from the room wall, and that reflection also reaches to in your device. Now, in case of wireless, what we have that we can have additive interference. The additive interference basically says that signals from multiple sources gets added up and interfere with the communication of a third device. Now the thing is that the individual signals may not have enough interference, but when they are getting added up, they boost up the signal strength to make it having interference with the existing signal. So that is kind of interesting. That while the individual signal strength are less, but you are getting interference from 3 or 4 different machines, and that gets added up and increases the power of the noise signal. That noise signal is interfering with your transmission. So that way, such kind of problems occur in case of wireless signal, and because of these reasons, we actually cannot detect collision. Because even if a collision happens, so by the time the signal gets propagated to the sender, the signal gets faded or signal get attenuated, and you will get a low signal reading. And that way, you will not be able to understand that whatever reading you are getting, it is the original signal or a kind of collided signal or an interfered signal. Okay, so this kind of problem happens in case of collision detection over wireless. One of the interesting problem in case of wireless that happens is called the hidden terminal problem. What is the hidden terminal problem? Say A has its sensing range of something like this. Okay, this circle. So that means if certain other nodes within this range is going to transfer data, then A can sense. Okay? A cannot sense beyond that, because in that case the signal will get attenuated and the signal strength will get so low that A will not be able to sense that there is an ongoing communication. Okay. Similarly, this is the range for C. Now assume both A and C is trying to send data to B. Now here you see that C is outside the sensing range of E, sensing range of A, and A is outside the sensing range of B. Now in this case, both are going to transmit data to B, and whenever both of they will not be able to sense the channel properly using that physical carrier sensing. And if they start transmitting data at the same instance of time, both of them will find the channel to be idle, because the other node is outside its sensing range, and they will start transmitting simultaneously, and that way there will be a kind of collision. Okay. And so this particular problem is called a hidden terminal problem, because now here C is hidden from A and A is hidden from C. There is another problem which happens that that is called an exposed terminal problem. Now in case of exposed terminal problem, what happens that say S1 is currently transmitting to R1. Now when S1 is transmitting to R1, this signal also receives to S2. Okay, and when S2 senses the channel, S2 finds that the channel is busy. Well, now when S2 finds that the channel is busy, S2 unnecessarily waits and H2 do not send the data, although it wants to send to data to R2, which is far apart from R1 and there is no possibility of collision. So here is a scenario where S1 and S2 can transmit simultaneously, but because of this exposed terminal problem, it prevents them to transmit simultaneously, and that will reduce the utilization of the transmission. Now, to solve this kind of problem, now in wireless scenario, the collision detection is not feasible because of this fading, shadowing, and multipath propagation. So what we do that to detect data loss due to interference, we use the data adder. Okay, so that is typically used in case of Wi-Fi. I was mentioning it earlier that in case of wireless channel, the loss rate is very high because of such kind of interference, and that's why we use explicit acknowledgement for every data frame which is being sent. Okay. So if the data frame is lost, then the acknowledgement is not received within a predefined timeout and you will transmit the data. Now, to avoid this kind of hidden node scenario and exposed node scenario, what we do that we use a concept called virtual carrier sensing, or sometimes it is called the CSMSC, carrier sense multiple access rate collision avoidance. Now, what happens in case of virtual carrier sensing? We use two special nodes, RTS and CTS. Well, now how this RTS and CTS work? So let me try to explain it with a clear diagram. So that was my earlier case that A wants to transmit to B and C also wants to transmit to B. Now before transmission, say A wants to transmit to B. So A first sends an RTS frame, request to send frame. Now if B receives this request to send frame, then B sees that, well, there is no other RTS frame that it has received or B is not going to any ongoing communication. So B broadcasts the CTS frame. Now this broadcasted CTS frame from B is also going to C. Okay. So C will also receive this CTS frame. Now once C receives this CTS frame, C actually blocks itself from transmitting further to B. Because C understands by receiving this CTS frame that, well, some other node is actually transmitting to B, so I should not transmit the data at this particular transmission instance. Well, so that way what happens? So in case of sender, the sender waits for a time that is called DIFS. Well, distributed interframe spacing time. You don't need to understand the details of all those things at this particular instance. So this is basically a waiting time when the sender actually senses the channel to see that whether there is any ongoing communication. It tries its best to estimate the channel. If the channel is idle for DIFS amount of time, then you send an RTS. At the receiver side, the receiver waits for some time and then it receives a CTS. After then it sends a CTS. Now once the CTS is received by the sender, then the sender starts sending the data. Now for the other stations, whenever they hear a RTS frame, well, they block their ongoing communication for a duration. Well, that we call as the network allocation vector or NAV. Well, so they basically set up their NAV, and by setting up their NAV, they transmit the data. Similarly, in case of CTS, whenever the receiver is broadcasting the CTS, the node which are in the sensing region of the receiver, they receive that CTS and they block their ongoing communication by setting their network allocation vector. So that way, whenever the nodes which are in the region of sender and whichever are in the region of receiver, they receive the RTS frame or the CTS frame, they block their network allocation vector and accordingly they block any kind of ongoing communication to avoid collision. Now you can always claim that RTS and the CTS frame can also go through some kind of collision, right? But that we typically ignore because this RTS and the CTS frame are the small frame in compared to the data frame and the acknowledgement frame. Okay, so that way, before every transmission, you transfer a RTS, get back a CTS, and then you start transmitting with the data frame. So with this RDS-CTS mechanism and the virtual carrier sensing, this communication in Wi-Fi works like this. That you first set, so n is a variable that denotes the round number. You set the value of n is 0. Then you use the PCS and VCS to sense the channel. If the channel is busy, then again you go for PCS and VCS. If the channel is idle for the DIFS duration, you transmit the frame, set the timeout. If the acknowledgement is received within the timeout, you again go to A1. If there is a timeout, then you take a variable called CW, that is called the contention window. Contention window. So this contention window in case of Wi-Fi, that actually helps in the idea of binary exponential backup that we have discussed earlier. So you set up this CW min equal to minimum of 2 into CW min and CW max. You have a maximum value of contention window. And then set equal to n equal to n plus 1. You choose a contention window value which is random between 0 and CW min. And then you wait for that many number of slots and then go to 2 once this timer expires. So that means what actually you are doing, that you are using the physical carrier sensing and the virtual carrier sensing to sense the channel. After sensing the channel, so this part is your CSMA part, okay, where you are sensing the channel. So apart from the physical carrier sensing, we are also using the virtual carrier sensing, because the physical carrier sensing is not reliable all the time. Now, if the channel is idle for certain predefined duration, that is called DIFS, distributed interframe spacing, then you transmit the frame, and if you receive an acknowledgement within that timeout, that means you have been able to successfully transmit the frame, you repeat the procedure. If not, you go with the binary exponential backup procedure. In case of binary exponential backup procedure, again the earlier case that at every round you double up the contention window min value until you reach to a maximum value of contention window, and then you take a random value between 0 and CW min, okay, and wait for that many number of slots, and then again apply PCS and VCS to transmit your packet. So this particular procedure of channel access in Wi-Fi, so IEEE 82.11 means Wi-Fi. So this particular channel access procedure in Wi-Fi, it is termed as distributed coordination function, or DCF. So the Wi-Fi router that you use, the Wi-Fi router in the map here, it runs this protocol to transfer the data. Okay, so that's all from my side. Let me know if you have any doubt in any of the part that we have discussed. So this was actually the last slide. So that concludes our discussion on the data link layer, as well as concludes the course. Any doubt?
Sir, during
Yeah.
framing, when we have in the Ethernet frame structure, we have length of the frame before the data part, right?
You have the length in the Ethernet header. The length is before the data part.
Yes, sir. So we already know how much data we are going to receive. So even if the start frame delimiter repeats in the data part, we should already be knowing that it is a part of data, right? So why do we again need to separately think that it is a start of another frame?
Excellent question. Okay, so well, I actually thought of to put up this question in your class test. So see, the bit stuffing and the byte stuffing concept that we have discussed. If you have observed carefully, the byte stuffing I have mentioned, that is for the point-to-point protocol. The bit stuffing I have mentioned for the HDLC protocol. Okay. So I was expecting that any one of you will ask the question, but no one has asked that what is the protocol for Ethernet? Well, now in case of Ethernet, because we have the length field in the header, That is the reason we do not apply any kind of bit-stuffing or byte-stuffing. We use the length field in the error to do it. One interesting thing is Ethernet frame structure is that this length field, if you see the header format, it is always written as type/length. Okay. Yeah, it is always written as type/length. Well, so this why it is written as type/length in the old Ethernet frame format, the field was actually the type field. Okay, so the type field means it usually used to say, so there are multiple different classes of Ethernet which were there. It used to say that what is the class of that Ethernet. Okay. And that class of the Ethernet actually depending on what type of cable you are going to use, whether it is 10/T or whether it is 10/100. So for different Ethernet cable, you have different speeds. So for some Ethernet, you have 100 Mbps. Then for the Gbps Ethernet, you have speed of 1 Gbps. So according to the type field, the MAC layer used to decide about what is going to be the maximum frame length for the Ethernet and the minimum frame length for the Ethernet. Okay. During that time, when this type field was basically used, Ethernet was Ethernet protocol that used to run along with the PPP protocol, the point-to-point protocol. Okay, so at that time the byte stuffing used to happen, but later on with the current version of the Ethernet, when we have this learning switch and all these things, and this learning switch actually reduced the possibility of collision, so that's why we do not bother much about the minimum frame length and the maximum frame length of Ethernet. This particular field has been changed to the length. Well, so with the new Ethernet frame structure, whenever we have this length field, the length field actually tells me that what is going to be the length of the frame. Well, so that way actually I do not need this kind of bit stuffing or the byte stuffing at the data point. So in today's Ethernet, we do not use bit stuffing or byte stuffing at the data point. Okay, because this length field is there in the data. But unless this length field is there, if you are using the old Ethernet frame structure, we used to have the type field there rather than the length field. Then you used to then you have to use either PPP or HTLC along with Ethernet to actually decode the data.
Okay, thank you.
Any other term? Well, just to mention that nowadays almost all the kernel protocol stack, they use both the Ethernet frame structure together, because this old structure is also supported to ensure the backward compatibility and also to support some of the embedded devices which used to have the old Ethernet frame format. So for example, I have this Wacom tablet which is connected to my machine. I was looking into this software which is used in the Wacom. They use the old Ethernet frame structure. So that way, depending on whether we are going to use for the old or new, these things get changed. But if you have the length field, if your Ethernet header contains the length field, then you do not need bit stuffing on it. Okay. Any other doubt? Okay. So I hope that this part that I have talked to you is clear to all of you. You are able to understand the stuffs. So if you have any further doubt, feel free to drop me an email or feel free to post on the Microsoft Teams. So that way we that way we'll be able to communicate. And as I have mentioned, that we will have our next class test or the final class test on this Saturday. and yeah, on this Saturday, and and that way we can wrap up the course. And by next week, I will be showing you the answer script for both class test 5 and class test 4 and class test 5. So that is all about this particular course. Hopefully, so this was a kind of tough time for you as well as for us. Personally, I never prefer such kind of online teaching, but that is the only mode I have to use. We could have much more interaction in an one-to-one in a live class that we have missed here, and I have to go entirely by the slides as much as possible. But anyway, I hope that I am able to at least share certain things with you. So if, anytime if you have any doubt, feel free to contact me. So that's all, and all the best for your other courses and the remaining part of the semester. So, so on the topic of network, if you have any doubt anytime, feel free to contact me. Okay, so I have uploaded all the slides in Moodle. You can download it from there for your reference. And also there are multiple internet materials. And for the last class test, we will have the syllabus of router in the ICMP ERP, those protocols and the MAC. Oh, okay. Thank you. Then I'm closing the session.